My name is Aram. I ran Stanton Park Records from 1980 something, and it's still going, but the record sales are not so good these days. I first heard about Dave through a record he cut in the 60s, but I was about 2 or 3 when he cut that record. But indirectly, what happened was I would be, me and my brothers and some friends, we'd be playing hide and go seek and stuff like this, and my friends lived next door to Dave. And I was on the other, my house was on the other side, so 2 doors down. And they'd say, don't go near the Arvedons, not Arvedon, Arvedons. And so that kind of got stored away and forgotten about. Then I heard it Till the Stroke of Dawn by the Psychopaths in 1982 or 3 or 4, something like that. And that was like kind of a mind-blowing record. It was on a compilation. It was the only record that sounded like that. It's just amazing. And so I started looking for that record. I found the record a few years later, paid for maybe $15, $20, $25, which I thought was a lot of money at the time for one single. And that was it for a while. And then in 1992, a tape arrives at a friend of mine's. It was by a band called the Derangers. And there was a picture of Dave on that record, on that cassette actually. Did I say record? Okay, cassette is what this was. It was a cassette. And so we were both sort of like, he's back, he's back. And then finally at TT the Bears, about another year later, we met, David and I met. And so we went through, I'm Dave, I'm Aram, the whole 9 yards. It's like, Dave, didn't you grow up in Newton? Yeah, I grew up in Newton. Which high school did you go to? Because there were 2. He goes, I went to Newton North. Okay, yeah, me too. Which junior high did you go to? He goes, I went to Warren, which is where I went. And then it hit back, it came all the way back. The Arvedons, 2 doors down. So this guy that made one of my favorite records grew up 2 doors down from me. Now, there's one more part of this. At around the same time, I was working on a book about New England garage bands, which the Psychopaths were a garage band, even if they kind of didn't refer to themselves that way. And I called it Till the Stroke of Dawn, because I couldn't think of really the best title for it, and it was one of my favorite things. And so I kind of recounted this story I just told you, like in the intro to that. It was just different. I mean, I was just getting into the 60s garage stuff, and by 60s garage stuff, we're talking about bands like the Remains, the Rock and Ramrods, and all these high school bands, and college bands, as it turns out, who would just go and make one record. They'd go and play dances, play the Beatles, the Stones, and all that sort of stuff. And they would have 1 or 2 or 3 originals, and they would go and record them. And these records were different. They're very much like the local records in the 70s, 80s, 90s, except that there was a little bit of that sort of stuff going on in the 50s, but the Beatles came along, the Beach Boys, the Stones, the Yardbirds. It was a huge onslaught of bands from like nothing, from like the Ventures to this. And so these kids were sort of like inspired. They wrote stuff, and then once they started doing their own thing, it became a different sound. And the New England bands were really different from a lot of the other bands. Like, I mean, every region had its own sound, but like, I grew up here, so I kind of identified with that. And yet, even amongst all of this, where all these bands kind of were looking up to the Remains, were looking up to the Rock and Ramrods, the Beatles, the Stones, Dave was like different. Till the Stroke of Dawn, I didn't even know the song was about Dracula. Okay, so have I watched Dave come up with the process of writing a song and then having it become a real song recorded? I've not actually seen that. I did a session, much like what he's doing here with his. I did a session for a couple songs back 1994, 5, something like that. And he had already sort of come up with the songs that are already mixed, and so he was just in the studio, and I was like kind of doing my part, and he was saying yes or no. But I've not really watched him do that. I know that he does that though.
Okay.
And that goes back, I think, all the way to the beginnings in Brandeis. You'd have to ask him, but I'm pretty sure it did.
Well, tell me a little about that. Tell me what you know about that. I'm curious.
Well, a lot of times what will happen with bands is they'll sort of like, friends will get together and you'll sort of be like a band. And it seems like Dave's always been like someone with a song, but no band. And so he'll find people who are willing to work with him. And especially in the earlier days, they were as far as I could tell, the rest of the band, it was the Psychopaths, were another band, and they just agreed to record with Dave. And he's going to have to tell you, I mean, I was not there, obviously, for that. But then going on, he did the next album, which was like maybe 2 or 3 years later. It was the same sort of deal. He had a bunch of these songs and kind of no real music or no real people to play it. And so John Walker, I believe, who was in the Psychopaths, was one of the people that he recruited to do these other albums. I would say, in a sense, yes. I remember when we put his website up a few years ago, like almost immediately this guy from England ordered all 5 of the CDs that were available then. There are people who have gotten, have sort of heard his stuff. I mean, it's like in the independent world, he is still way under the radar because his records have only gone a certain distance, even though they've sort of gone all over the world. People don't quite get what's going on until they do. And like Dr. Demento picked up on one of his songs in like 1993 or 4, and I'm sure some people sort of heard it there and said, what is this thing? What is this guy singing about John Wilkes' telephone booth? So cult following is, I think, sub-cult following. That's my guess. And then again, I don't really know exactly what's gone on recently with that. Dave's a total original. He's in another planet as far musically speaking. He listens to the Stones. He listens to the Beatles. He obviously knows them. But I don't think that he allows that to sort of inspire what he's doing. I think Dave writes, and he writes these lyrics, and he has these concepts. And then sometimes the people around him, it's more the people around him who sort of inspire what the music sounds like. You know, because some of this stuff I don't think has anything to do with the Stones. But there is that energy, that sort of this creative energy from the 60s in what he does. So I think that's it. But you know, there are people you can point to and say, you were inspired by the Stones, you were Beatles influenced, you're Hendrix influenced. I don't think I could say it with Dave. And interestingly enough, the one song of the 60s, like the 60s bands from that era that he covered, was There's a Kind of Hush. And I saw him do that live, and that was like a standout. And much better than the recorded version he did. Sorry, Dave, but. Performing with a band means you have to have a band. Booking a show in Boston these days is near impossible. Booking a show even 15 years ago was really hard. I think a lot of it is just like having to deal with the people booking. And that's one of the reasons I threw my hands up and said, that's it, I'm done. You know, it's like when I had to, I mean, the last few bands I played with, I didn't have to book. But, you know, I'm thinking about now, I'd love to play in a band again, but I sit there and go, I don't know anyone in the clubs now. I don't want to be calling him or emailing him in this case all the time. And I think that Dave's probably said something similar. It's just, it's too much of a hassle. Plus you have to have a band, plus you have to be rehearsed, plus you have to promote yourself. It's a full-time job on top of a full-time job. Well, you know, I hear stories from him about things he's done that are more Dave-like than what I've actually witnessed. But one of the highlights, so this is about, I'm sorry, I'm not doing the questions, okay. One of the highlights of what Dave being Dave, Dave doing something that is like completely in his own thing, goes back to the karaoke thing. For a while, like I said, he wasn't able to sort of have a band together. He probably didn't want to have a band together. It's, like I said, it's a lot of work. So he'd start taking rough mixes from the studios and go to karaoke bars. Put his music in, sing his song in a karaoke bar. Round about 1996, 7, 8, something like that, Penn and Teller heard about Dave. Not through the karaoke stuff, but through one of the CDs that came out of retrospective stuff. Apparently one of them some of them were, one or the other was a big fan. They came to town, gave a bunch of us free tickets. We got to see Penn and Teller for free, which was fun. Then we all went up to Whaley's, and Dave had his cassette. And so there it was, Penn and Teller watching Dave do karaoke live. It was pretty unique, and there's some pictures of that too. I think it's amazing he keeps at it, because it's like, this is like, it's not like a hobby that you sort of do like trains and stuff like this. This is something that you have to put a lot into, and he's still at it all these years. I mean, he's coming up on doing 50 years of music. 50 years of making, I mean, it's not all the time, but he's just doing it. And I think it's just, it's incredible. And I mean, you know, like anything else, you know, he has his hot times, his cold times and stuff, but, you know, I mean, there's one of the CDs he did a few years ago that just has some just stunning, stunning songs on there and stuff. So, I don't know. I think it's unique. I think you have to sort of look at it. I mean, sometimes people might listen to him and say, this guy's just doing the comedy routine. But there's something more going on there. And it's like, he's writing about characters. He's taking characters and pushing him to the extreme at times. And at other times he might be doing his own thing. And he has some themes running through. I mean, I don't know if you picked up on some of them, but there's the Aardvark. You need to find out about the Aardvark. There's also Watertown Square, and I still haven't figured out exactly what Watertown Square is about. And then, and then there's some stuff in Somerville also. So he's picked up on local areas and local things, and he keeps at it.
Somebody else, somebody else, somebody else.